Welcome to this explainer. So, I want you to imagine something for a second. What would actually happen to your wallet, the broader global economy, and honestly, world peace, if a seemingly flawless US military victory went completely sideways? Well, today we are jumping straight into a really fascinating hypothetical scenario set in February of 2026, where a super quick, decisive win rapidly spirals into absolute global chaos. This predictive model digs into exactly what happens when a traditional, conventional superpower runs headfirst into asymmetric warfare. Let's get into it.
Okay, get this. The craziest part of the scenario is how a textbook military knockout on paper morphs into a complete economic nightmare in basically no time at all. The scenario starts at 6:45 a.m. An initial strike hits a compound in Tehran, effectively taking out the supreme leader. Within just a few hours, boom, over 900 targets are decimated. We're talking nuclear sites, missile launchers, command centers, the whole shebang. By day 5, 30 Iranian warships are sitting at the bottom of the ocean. The military declares decisive superiority. Everything went exactly to plan, right? But then, fast forward just 4 weeks later, the ripple effects cause global oil to absolutely skyrocket to $126 a barrel. So how does a total, unquestionable military success lead to an immediate financial disaster? Well, let's break that down.
All right, part 1, the illusion of victory, or the decapitation playbook versus reality. The Pentagon's expectation here is honestly pretty straightforward. It's a classic playbook. Kill the leader, the regime folds, and everybody goes home. It's worked in the past, so planners just assume it's going to work here. But this analysis points out a massive, massive cultural miscalculation. The 86-year-old supreme leader actually knew the strike was coming, and he just stayed right at his desk. In Shia Islam, dying this way isn't viewed as a defeat at all. It triggers martyrdom. So instead of the whole system collapsing, the military command just instantly shifts. It goes entirely decentralized. Suddenly, every regional cell is getting its own specific orders and targets. You literally cannot decapitate a movement that no longer relies on a single head.
And then there's this deep, almost tragic strategic irony to all of this. Those incredibly precise strikes, they devastated major cities like Tehran, Isfahan, and Tabriz. And those happen to be home to Iran's most educated and progressive populations. You know, the exact people who are most likely to actually support regime change from the inside. Meanwhile, the deeply religious hardliners, the ones willing to fight to the bitter end, are stationed way up in the mountains, completely untouched by the urban bombing. So in trying to wipe out the enemy leadership, the strikes essentially destroyed their own greatest leverage. They turned potential domestic allies into collateral damage.
Which brings us to Section 2, the asymmetric counter-strategy, specifically targeting the petrodollar.
See, Iran doesn't just line up tanks and fight back conventionally. No, they go after the invisible scaffolding of American power. The focus shifts directly to the Gulf states, places like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar. Why them? Because these states are the financial engine of the U.S. petrodollar system. They sell their oil exclusively in U.S. dollars, and then they reinvest massive amounts of that money right back into American markets. Plus, they host critical U.S. military bases and actually opened up their local airspace for those initial strikes. So the counter-strategy is surgically precise. Hit the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, hit the Aramco refineries, hit Dubai International Airport. These cities are absolute miracles of engineering, right? Glass towers, man-made islands, but they are 100% built on the assumption of permanent, uninterrupted peace.
And this exposes a really fascinating demographic vulnerability. I mean, what happens when the expats just pack up? Take Dubai, for instance. 90% of its population is made up of foreign workers. These folks don't have deep national loyalty to the UAE. They hold employment visas. So the second drones start dropping from the sky, that expatriate workforce immediately starts booking the first flight out. And when the expats leave, the entire city basically just stops functioning. It's literally like pulling the batteries out of a toy.
Moving right along to Section 3, choking the global economy at the Strait of Hormuz.
Think about this for a second. The Strait of Hormuz is tiny. We're talking about a 21-mile wide gap in the ocean. But a staggering 20% of the world's daily oil supply passes through this exact hallway. On March 2nd of this predictive timeline, Iran essentially just slams the door shut, locking drones onto those crucial shipping lanes. But hey, the oil is really only half the story here, because the strait doesn't just carry energy out to places like Japan or India, it carries vital food and medicine in. The entire Desert Gulf region built its center of gravity in a spot that absolutely cannot feed itself if this supply line gets cut.
The fallout from that, it is instantaneous. By just making the strait unsafe to navigate, insurance companies completely freak out and trigger cancellation clauses on war risk policies. Protection and indemnity insurance, which these commercial ships legally need just to operate, saw their premiums skyrocket to 5% of the total ship's value. For a massive oil tanker, you're looking at an extra $5 million per trip. Because of that single financial bottleneck, commercial tanker traffic plummets by an unbelievable 81% in just 1 week. 81%.
And you can guess the domino effect here, right? Brent crude oil just blasts past $100 for the first time in years, peaking at a super painful $126 a barrel. And we all know this isn't just a random number on a chart. This means absolutely crippling prices at your local gas pump and skyrocketing costs at the grocery store. The global economy is suddenly choking. Not because of some massive naval battle, but because of the strategic denial of a 21-mile waterway and the massive insurance panic that followed.
Okay, part 4. The math of drone warfare, which really just becomes a brutal war of attrition.
If we break down the literal cost of warfare, the math just blows your mind. On one side, you've got the Shahed 136 drone, flying super low and slow. On the other side, you've got the high-tech US Patriot missile interceptor. Now, the drone costs somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000. The Patriot missile, $4 million each. And because those drones fly so low, the missiles actually miss pretty often, meaning you might have to fire 2 or 3 of them just to stop one cheap drone. So for every single dollar Iran spends, America is spending up to $200 to shoot it down. Then, think about production. Iran is pumping out maybe 500 drones a month. The US defense industry only produces about 620 Patriot interceptors in an entire year. And finally, mobility. You can launch 5 drones from the back of a regular flatbed truck, park behind a building, fire them off, and drive away. A Patriot system, it needs 6 major components, takes 30 minutes to set up, and you can literally see it from space. It's an absolutely lopsided numbers game.
Now, obviously, both sides have massive geographic blind spots. The Gulf states are basically just flat, exposed deserts. Their most critical infrastructure, things like desalination plants, centralized airports, oil fields, are totally sitting ducks. Iran, on the other hand, has the advantage of this rugged, mountainous coastline, which is just perfect for hiding those mobile drone trucks in caves and valleys. But the simulation does expose a huge weakness for Iran: severe water stress. Their lakes are literally drying up, so the long-term strategy for the US naturally shifts to targeting that fragile water infrastructure, dams, reservoirs, trying to fracture the country along its ethnic fault lines. It essentially becomes this brutal race to see whose domestic infrastructure breaks first.
Finally, Section 5, the Empire's Trap. This is the unresolved dilemma.
So we hit week 3, oil is spiraling out of control, and the political theater kicks into overdrive trying to force an end to this. In the model, Donald Trump threatens to just bomb Iran's energy infrastructure unless they reopen the strait. When that threat totally fails, the narrative suddenly pivots to claims that productive talks are happening behind the scenes. This actually causes a brief 5-day pause where markets surge and oil drops a bit. But literally hours later, Iran's foreign ministry comes out and says, nope, that's a lie. There are no talks. By week 4, the deceased leader's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, takes over as the new supreme leader, and his very first message to the world is crystal clear: the strait stays closed. The regime hasn't collapsed at all. It's actually consolidated firmly under the Revolutionary Guard.
Which brings us to the ultimate trap. The US is essentially boxed into a total no-win situation here. Think about it. If they choose to just pack up and leave the conflict, the Gulf states permanently lose faith in American protection. The foundational petrodollar system starts to crack, and the empire basically admits to the world that its power was a bluff. But if they stay in the conflict, the global economy just continues to bleed out from a self-inflicted wound, all while the military is burning through millions of dollars every single day just to shoot down $20,000 drones.
I want to end this explainer with a really profound thought from the analysis. The whole system is built on this idea that if you fear it, you obey it. But what actually happens when an adversary just stops being afraid, and instead they use the global economy and asymmetrical math right back against you? It leaves us with a pretty heavy question to chew on. In a highly connected, super fragile global economy, what is the true underlying cost of maintaining military dominance? Thanks so much for hanging out for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.